Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Does Business Rescue in South Africa Work? Is it a success or a failure? My name is Kajal Ramanan, and I will be directing this evening's program. I am a member of the University of KwaZulu-Natal's Business Rescue Unit. Personally, my research includes undertaking the impact of post-commencement finance on business rescue, and currently I am undertaking a PhD. My research includes investigating the effectiveness of business rescue processes during the COVID-19 pandemic. Honored guests, I am joined tonight by my Business Rescue Unit team members and our guest speakers. The order of the proceedings will open with a welcome address by Professor Mabuto Sibanda, who is the Dean and Head of the School of Accounting, Economics and Finance at UKZN. We will have an introduction of the guest speakers by Ms. Zama Gomedi, who is a Business Rescue Unit member. We will then proceed to our address by the keynote speakers, who is Dr. Eric Levenstein and Business Rescue Practitioner, Mr. Mtunzi. It will then be followed with an interactive session where we will attend to your questions with our guest speakers who will provide us with their expert advice. We will then close the session with the closing remarks and a vote of thanks by Professor Rajaram, who is the unit's director. Please ensure that you are muted during the session. Your camera is turned off, and I welcome you to please make use of the Q&A tab, which should be at the bottom of your screen or your device, to type in your comments and questions during the presentation. We will try our best to address them during the session and during the interactive session. Please take note that this presentation is being recorded, and we will be posting the recording on the UKZN Business Rescue Unit's website in due course. And I now hand you over to Professor Mabuto Sibanda for the welcome address.
Thank you indeed, Kajal. Program Director, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, greetings. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to the webinar on business rescue in South Africa, hosted by the Business Rescue Unit, a research and capacity building unit in the School of Accounting, Economics and Finance at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I would like to recognize our guest speakers this evening, Dr. Eric Levenstein, who is the Head of Insolvency and Business Rescue at Worksman Attorneys, and Mr. Mngani Mtunzi, a businessman, director of companies, and published author and scholar. As a premier university of African scholarship, the University of KwaZulu-Natal seeks to engage collaboratively with the wider community to gain insight into issues that shape our teaching and learning, scholarship of discovery, and innovation. In view of this, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to probe into a wider scope of business rescue in South Africa and provide the audience with insights and knowledge into business rescue space. Some interesting statistics by the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission show that on average, 364 companies per annum entered business rescue between 2011 and 2022, of which only 19 reached substantial implementation of their business rescue plans. Of the entire cohorts that entered business rescue during this period, 12.5% ended up in liquidation. Thus, this webinar seeks to interrogate the effectiveness and role of business rescue in South Africa. And I do not doubt that the insights from this discussion will assist us to understand whether the primary objective is achievable. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, this webinar will pay particular focus on business rescue legislation, business rescue failure and success rates, and overall prospects of business rescue in South Africa. It is of paramount importance to know who is eligible for business rescue and why. Moreover, addressing issues of business failure in a dynamic operating environment that is coupled with globalization, volatility, uncertainty, technological innovation, and disruption will bring to light ways of building sustainable and resilient businesses that support the aims of the South African government's National Development Plan, Vision 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, the discourse on business rescue, business resilience, continuity, and regeneration has never been more paramount than in the present day. The disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic calls for a united front in finding solutions for our economy. The Business Rescue Unit will thus be hosting the first ever conference on business resilience, continuity, and regeneration in Durban from the 22nd of March and right until the 24th of March 2023. The conference will bring together academicians, practitioners, and policymakers in one room to debate fundamental topics related to business rescue as a thematic area. Once again, let me take this opportunity to welcome you to this webinar and wish you a fruitful engagement. I now hand over to Ms. Zama Gumede to introduce our guest speakers for this evening. And I sincerely thank everyone.
Does business rescue in South Africa work? Is it a success or failure? This speaker needs no introduction in this area of work. It is a privilege to introduce to you Dr. Eric Levinson, Head of Insolvency and Business Rescue at Waxman Attorneys. Eric Levinson has been a director at Waxman's Attorneys since 1993 and is the head of insolvency and business rescue practice. He specializes in litigation and dispute resolution, with a particular focus on business rescue, insolvency and restructuring, banking and finance, and corporate recovery of debt. His expertise extends to director liability issues. He regularly delivers seminars and writes for various publications on these topics, amongst others. He is the chairperson of the South African Restructuring and Insolvency Practitioners Association, SARIPA, and sits on the board of Insol International, a worldwide group of insolvency practitioners. Eric has a BCom, LLB degrees, higher diplomas in company law and tax, a diploma in insolvency law, and a doctorate of laws in business rescue, and befitting the author of the South African Business Rescue Procedure, published in October 2017 by LexisNexis and its relevant updates. Welcome, Dr. Eric Levinson.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gumede, and welcome to everybody. It's a privilege to be with you this evening. Please excuse the sirens in the background, but I am sitting in Gauteng, in Sandton, and I'm going to share with you this evening some of my thoughts on business rescue. I've been involved for a long period of time in this area of law, and I hope to enlighten you on my personal thoughts and also take you through some of the examples of business rescue successes and failures in what we've experienced here at my firm Worksmans in Sandton, Johannesburg. I must just say that I did attend University of KwaZulu-Natal. I was there 1981 to 1984. I lived in Lamont Road, Durban, which is just down the road from Howard College. I'm not sure if it's still called Howard College. I played rugby on the rugby fields just down the road, and I've got very fond memories of my days at University of KZN. So let's understand a little bit about where business rescue has come from, why we have it, and why I believe it is essential for all legal practitioners and basically any businessman to understand what it is all about. So over the past few years, the need to restructure companies, both globally and in South Africa, has come to the fore. Clearly burdening debt in recent times, conflict in Eastern Europe, inflation, interest rate hikes, and of course the power challenges that we're having in South Africa, never mind the supply chain issues, have all caused companies to become distressed and sometimes operationally and financially distressed, where you have an opportunity to get an intervention like a business rescue. In South Africa, prior to 2011, when we got our new Companies Act, all we could do with companies that were struggling or in dire straits was to put them into liquidation or insolvency. And that frustrated a lot of practitioners. I was involved in 2007 in making submissions to the body that was looking at the new Companies Act. And in fact, Chapter 6 came to the fore in 2011, bringing us into line, by the way, with international jurisdictions who all had restructuring mechanisms and the opportunity to give companies a fresh start when they faced a position of financial distress. So the business rescue mechanism is over 11 years old now. It's become a tool used for restructuring of distressed companies. It remains under scrutiny. Our courts continue to assess it, continue to provide judgments in relation to the activities of both business rescue practitioners as well as the operation of the legislation. We've certainly seen a growing legal precedent set by our courts in practice. And I must say that even though there was the opportunity by the minister to provide specialist courts for business rescue, that hasn't happened. But I must say the judgment that we've seen from all the divisions in the Supreme Court of South Africa, or the High Court of South Africa, as well as the Supreme Court of Appeal, have delivered really good judgments and which have assisted practitioners in the way they approach the legislation. I think really it comes down to the options faced by boards of companies that are faced with distress, an inability to pay their debts, an inability to continue to trade on a solvent basis, and where they need an intervention. And what is that intervention? Either they engage with all their stakeholders, creditors, suppliers, employees, and try and work out some form of informal restructuring. Or alternatively, they have to look at quite seriously the filing for business rescue. How is that done? The board would engage with a business rescue practitioner, appoint him or her as the business rescue practitioner by way of a resolution, and put the company into a change of status, which is business rescue itself. Looking at the current state of South Africa's economy, South Africa has recently reported that South Africa's economy has contracted by 1.3% in the last quarter of last year. And I think there is an expectation that that number might rise as we go through the first quarter of 2023. With continued load shedding forecast for businesses across South Africa, I think we might see more distress in the months to come. It is not easy for SMEs, small and medium enterprises, to continue to trade when they are faced with the increasing and burdening cost of running their companies, with the added burden of paying for power and the ability to trade and run their machines, etc. Of course, South Africa's recent grey listing has not assisted in relation to certain companies that are trading in financial distress. So business rescue has become the tool for financially distressed companies. What is it? It's the ability to appoint an independent person, a business rescue practitioner, a supervisor, to come along, restructure the affairs, the business, the property, and the debt and liabilities, and sometimes the equity of a company, that would maximize the likelihood of the company continuing to trade on a solvent basis into the future, or if that is not possible, to deliver a better dividend than would be expected in a liquidation of that company. So it comes down to the board of directors. And I always say, you know, it'd be fantastic if we could have a session like this tonight for directors of distressed companies, but I don't think you'd get a long queue of participants in a seminar like this. So it really is about educating South Africans' corporates about the option, how it works, who are the business rescue practitioners, and I've no doubt Mr. Matunzi will share with us some of his thoughts being a business rescue practitioner, and how those challenges in a live matter would surface and would have to be dealt with by any business rescue practitioner in any mandate. I would also like to say that we as legal practitioners have seen some really interesting cases over the last decade. And I'm going to share with you in a minute some of those ideas in relation to, let's say, the successes and some of the failures that we've come across. What is the most important feature of business rescue? It's the moratorium, the freezing of claims once a company has gone into business rescue. No business rescue practitioner can restructure a company when faced with an ongoing burden of being sued, corporates having to pay out and prefer certain creditors, where there is an opportunity to file for rescue. Certainly when a company is facing an inability to pay its debts, it's got to be considered. And that really is the option of business rescue. We've seen some really good examples of the process. I'd like to share some of those with you. I think that what is very interesting is that people need to understand what is the test for success of a business rescue. Now, when one looks at the definition that I spoke about a little bit earlier, of course, it would be fantastic if every business rescue would result in the appointment of a practitioner, a restructuring of the debt, compromise of the debt, and allow the company to continue to trade on a solvent basis going forward and exit from the business rescue process. That is the first prize. The second drop down, or the default position, is the structured wind down of the company that provides a better dividend to creditors than they would get in the liquidation. Now, generally in a liquidation, the banks would hold security. They would take the lion's share of any distribution because of the fact that they hold security, and generally concurrent creditors get very little in the rand in a liquidation scenario. What business rescue practitioners try to do is deliver a better dividend than they would get, or creditors would get in a liquidation. Now, that's the challenge. The success, of course, might be the fact that there's a better dividend than a liquidation dividend. And a case for stakeholders to consider is, has it been successful? If you're getting 0 in a liquidation, you're getting 30 cents in a business rescue, clearly that's a better outcome than a 0 dividend payout. So let me now share with you some of the cases that I've dealt with over the last few years and give you some idea of the successes that we've dealt with in business rescue. Firstly, South African Airways went into business rescue in December 2019, just before the onset of the COVID pandemic, and remained in rescue until it emerged in April 2021. Soon after it exited from business rescue, the Takatsu Consortium made an offer for 51% of the equity stake in the airline, and that deal is still pending. I think it is still subject to competition approval, but certainly that is something that we are hoping will happen and will be approved by the Competition Commission. SAA is flying again. I mean, that is certainly a successful position. It is part of the capacity load of flying passengers in South Africa, and that is a good thing. So in my view, I think the SAA business rescue turned out to be successful. Of course, the company did not land up in liquidation like SA Express. The other one that's very interesting is Mango Airlines. There is a potential sale of that company that also went into business rescue. It currently is in business rescue, and hopefully there will be some outcome there shortly. The other very interesting example of an airline in a restructuring was Comair. I was intimately involved in that matter. Comair went into business rescue in May 2020, just as the pandemic arrived in South Africa. Comair, I'm sure you know, operated the British Airways franchise in the country, as well as the Kalula low-cost airline. And once it went into rescue, it had to shut down just because passengers weren't flying because of the pandemic. There were some difficulties in respect of the purchase of the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft, which unfortunately were grounded as soon as they arrived in South Africa because of issues relating to that aircraft, which unfortunately related to aircraft disasters in Ethiopia and in other jurisdictions such as Indonesia. Those aircraft will have to be given back, and of course there is litigation that remains ongoing today in respect of Comair trying to claim back its deposits from Boeing, and certain other damages claimed. There is the prospect, potentially, even though the company has now filed for liquidation, eventually ran out of funding, even though that funding was put up by a consortium for a period in business rescue. Unfortunately, that line of funding ran out and the company was placed into business rescue in April last year. This has resulted in 40% of South Africa's airline capacity being closed down because of the fact that Comment can no longer trade. So that, people might say, would be a failure. There is, by the way, watch this space, there might still be an opportunity for a buyout of certain assets from Comair. So you can see there's the good, the bad, and there's certainly some of the ugly as well. Another very interesting turnaround in business rescue was Ster-Kinekor. Ster-Kinekor was South Africa's largest cinema group and had a 65% market share of the cinema business in South Africa. Company employed about 700 odd people. It went into business rescue in January 2021. Again, because of the pandemic, people couldn't go to movie theaters. Company had no choice but to halt operations and file for business rescue. Interestingly enough, in business rescue, they managed to get people back into cinemas. I think Top Gun and Tom Cruise assisted in that regard. And they had to renegotiate leases across the country. Certain of their theaters were closed down, which certainly is an opportunity that any practitioner can do within the context of a business rescue. You can renegotiate contracts, you can get more favorable terms, particularly when your lease obligations are so high, it makes the business unsustainable. And in the Ster-Kinekor matter, that certainly was one of the objectives of the process. Leases were renegotiated. And the business was in fact sold for 250 million rand. It's been published in the press. The practitioners had that plan approved at 99% by all creditors voting on that plan. And it's expected that Ster-Kinekor will exit from the business rescue process once certain of its or all of its suspensive conditions are fulfilled. Phumelela Gaming and Leisure was a horse racing and gaming company that went into business rescue in May 2020. After a very complex business rescue process, it was reported that the Oppenheimer family bought into the company. It was in its business rescue process. It saved thousands of jobs. And what was very interesting was that if Phumelela went into liquidation, literally thousands of racehorses would have had to be put down, and all the racing courses in South Africa would have to have been closed. Never mind the loss of jobs, and the jockey industry would have come to a close. That was a deal which involved over 100 million rand in payouts to creditors, and the deal was reported to be worth somewhere in the region of about 550 million rand. So those are significant transactions that have come out of the business rescue process. And then the interesting one of the most interesting one, and I really say that this is one of the most successful, is the Edcon or Edgar's business rescue. Edcon went to business rescue in April 2020. People were just not buying clothing during the pandemic. And as a result, in a massive drop in clothing sales caused by the pandemic, significant debt losses, a burdening debt in respect of leases across the country, business rescue intervened, and Edcon went into business rescue. Now, after a period of time, the practitioners were successful in managing to sell Jet, which was part of Edgar's, to the Fashini Group, TFG, and the Edgar's business, after obviously a reduction in the footprint of the number of stores in South Africa, was sold to Retailability in 2020. So again, the business rescue process is a developing process. It provides what we call distressed M&A opportunities. It saves jobs, which is of course the objective of any business rescue process, the retention of jobs. When government introduced this business rescue process, was the major concern and feature of business rescue in South Africa. And as you can see from the Edgar's and retail clothing opportunity to save that business, almost 5,000 jobs, just over 5,000 jobs were saved. And there's been lots of other examples. I can't go through all of them. I'm talking now about successes. The new house of Busby went through a business rescue process. It was successfully restructured. We've done lots of mining companies, and Dusolite is one that recently closed with a transaction where the mine in South Africa, in fact, enjoyed a 23% market share of the industrialite projects in the worldwide supply of industrialite, and that company was now bought by ARM, a South African entity, and all 181 employees retained their jobs. And there's been construction examples, there've been other examples in South Africa of very interesting outcomes for business rescue practitioners and stakeholders. And I think it's very important for all of us, including business rescue practitioners, and I'm sure again, Mr. Mutunzi will deal with this, is to showcase the good stories of rescue. Because after all, it's always a better outcome than a liquidation. A liquidation is the end game for any company. Liquidation means the end of the company's life. All jobs would then be terminated. There's very seldom an opportunity to sell a business out of liquidation, whereas, of course, as I've shown you now, from a success perspective, there certainly are opportunities to sell businesses out of business rescue. The recent filing for Tongaat Hewlett, which is very close to home in KZN, has been an interesting outcome. Of course, Tongaat Hewlett was founded in 1892, and believe it or not, employs over 30,000 people. It's a leading agribusiness in both sugar, ethanol, animal feed, and cattle, has a massive asset base, and has now gone into business rescue. The practitioners worked with and continue to work with the banks and with various stakeholders in trying to sell certain assets out of that group. And clearly there's going to be ultimately a plan filed. There has been a postponement of the filing of that plan. And from October 2022, that business rescue remains a work in progress. Of course, everyone wants to see Tongaat Hewlett and its businesses being preserved and retained. It has a massive and dramatic impact on employment levels in KZN and for South Africa as a whole. I think the other interesting one that I'd like to share with you, which is not a business rescue, is in fact Steinhoff. And Steinhoff is a international, or Steinhoff International Holdings. There was a compromise that was put through, which is a derivative of a restructuring process. If you look at the Companies Act, Section 155 provides the opportunity to do an informal process rather than a formal business rescue, and put forward a plan to creditors where there's an offer in the rand for the debt. Now, this was done in South Africa, and it was done in the Netherlands because the company was trading duly in both the Netherlands and in South Africa. And in fact, there was massive litigation, which was well reported in the press in the Steinhoff matter. But believe it or not, the South African and Dutch courts managed to get 50 million rand being compromised in South Africa, and some 1.4 billion rand in euros settled through the 155 equivalent process in the Netherlands. So Steinhoff continues to trade. Some of those companies that are in the group is Pep Stores, which of course has a major footprint in South Africa. And what's interesting is the ISS Securities Class Action Services in the United States reported that the Steinhoff settlement was listed in its top 25 securities related settlements outside of North America in October 2022. That matter closed in 2022, and certain elements are still ongoing. So that's my wrap up of the examples of restructuring business rescue processes in South Africa. And I hope that has helped you in understanding what we do as practitioners, as legal practitioners. The market in Gauteng is pretty buoyant, as it is in the Cape and in KZN. I don't believe there's going to be a drop-off of cases this year. I think the potential would be an increase. Some companies are going through an investment review, or let's say an informal look-see at the company. Some of those might be restructured informally, and some of these companies might end up in business rescue. I just want to end off with some interesting anecdotes on the process. In the Commie matter, the South African business rescue process, Chapter 6, was in fact recognized by the US Bankruptcy Court in Chapter 15 of the US Bankruptcy Court Code in the New York Southern District Division in April 2022. 21. And what was interesting is the judge there looked at the South African process. The practitioners came along to the New York court, and the judge in New York court decided that the South African process was robust enough, was an equivalent to a Chapter 11 process, and in fact recognized the Chapter 6 process in the New York Bankruptcy Court. This is the only time this has happened to date, and that litigation, or let's say the opening of that file, remains in place in the New York Bankruptcy Court. It's been converted now into a liquidation process. But what is good for South Africa is that a court such as the US Bankruptcy Court has recognized the South African business rescue process as a robust and certainly tick-boxed all the elements of the South African process, the moratorium, the way it's run, etc. Just to end off, the South African courts have certainly provided good precedents. I think we've seen some cases where there's been some criticism of business rescue practitioners maybe who haven't operated their mandates successfully, and there's been some where there have been certainly commendations or let's say positive news from the courts in relation to how these matters have been run. I think certain sectors in the South African economy support the business rescue process. I think the South African Airways example certainly elevated the knowledge base of the South African public to understand more about business rescue. Hopefully Tom Gartulis, because it's a very high profile matter, will do the same. And I think the more we talk about it in forums like this, I think the more important it is that we understand how the process works, that there is a viable option to restructure companies, and certainly a viable option to save jobs once companies are restructured in South Africa. Just a little bit about SURIPA, the South African Restructuring and Insolvency Practitioners Association. We have over 800 members in South Africa, made up of lawyers, judges, academics, insolvency practitioners, business rescue practitioners, of course, auctioneers, a lot of people involved in the restructuring business and profession. And we have obviously conferences and lots of regional conferences, annual conference, webinars, and it's a very important aspect of restructuring in South Africa. There's recently been a course that's just been put forward for business rescue and for insolvency. So it's a robust, growing sector of what we do in the insolvency world, let's call it that. Recently, SURIPA had partnered with the Arbitration Foundation of South Africa, and where we have partnered with AFSA in providing dispute resolution mechanisms to make it much faster to have disputes in a business rescue dealt with in a mediation or let's say dispute resolution process run by AFSA in conjunction with SURIPA. And that's ongoing. In fact, we heard today that certain clauses are going to be incorporated in that process in the Tom Gartulis matter. I do think it's important that I raise quickly the role of the CRO, the Chief Restructuring Officer. Many companies, in fact, employ a CRO rather than file for formal rescue. That, in fact, was done in the Tom Gartulis matter. Unfortunately, the CRO had to be converted from a CRO into a formal rescue, and that's why the rescue practitioners have now been appointed in that forum. I think there is a role for CROs. I think the right people put into the role of sitting with the board, trying to work through an informal restructuring, working with the stakeholders, particularly the financiers and let's say management and the board, in trying to put together, let's say, an informal restructuring, certainly as a part to play. And I think we might see more of that in South Africa as we go forward. So creditors, I think, have bought into business rescue generally in South Africa. I think they understand the process a lot better. I once gave a lecture in 2011, and I said to my audience, look to your left and look to your right. One of you are going to be affected by business rescue in some way or form as you go on in business. And I think that very much has been the case over the last decade. I think the big lending banks support the process if obviously there cannot be an informal restructuring. So just to end off some takeaways, I think South Africa has come a long way. We certainly have brought our systems in line with international jurisdictions for restructuring. I think business rescue is a great example. And as I said earlier, the process has been now recognized in the US Bankruptcy Court. I think, as I said earlier, we're going to face tough trading conditions into 2023. We might certainly see some boards becoming more proactive, getting early to try and get, let's say, intervention at an earlier stage rather than a stage which is too late. You don't want to file for rescue when in fact you should be filing for liquidation, because there'll be nothing left to rescue. There will only be the outcome of a business rescue converted into a liquidation quite quickly. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope I've shared with you some of my thoughts and ideas, and certainly some of our, let's say, track records of business rescue in South Africa. I'm obviously very happy to take questions towards the end of our session. Again, I want to thank the University of KZN inviting me to join, even though I'm sitting in Gauteng. Again, very happy to have participated this evening, so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Levenstein. Our next speaker, a leader and innovator in the business environment. It gives me honor to present the next speaker, a businessman, director of companies, and published author and scholar, Mr. Mncane Mthunzi. Mncane Mthunzi is an experienced business turnaround specialist, restructuring practitioner, and researcher. Mncane is currently the owner, co-operator of Gravenston, a hygiene equipment and refurbishment business. He is also the founder of Mthunzi Audacity Financial Services, an insurance brokerage business. He is the immediate past Chief Operations Officer at Edcon Group, with responsibilities that included real estate, supply chain, global sourcing, HR, and group shared services. He was also the supplier development executive at Massmart Group for over 3 years before joining the Builders Board and Exco, where he was responsible for superstore strategy, store rollouts, and store operations. He is the former CEO of Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, CGCSA. Mncane also worked for Microsoft as strategy consultant and later as sales executive. He started his career at Accenture, where he worked in many industries, both locally and internationally, handling large-scale system integrations and business solutions for several clients. He is the immediate past president of the Black Management Forum, BMF. Mncane has written extensively on business leadership, turnarounds, and change management. Welcome, Mr. Mncane Mthunzi.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Zama. Much appreciated. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation to participate. It's been a while not reflecting and writing notes or gathering my thoughts about these type of issues. I spend most of my time literally trying to fix my businesses and trying to survive and grow and look for opportunities. So I'm going to approach this. Eric, I think, has done a great job, by the way. So he's a veteran in the space, and I'm glad to share a podium, so to speak, virtually with you, Eric. It's an honor, and I think you have covered extensively those areas that are critical in terms of understanding what we're dealing with, and the BR from a concept point of view. So my approach is going to be slightly different. I think I'm more of a, how do I call it? Let me introduce myself this way, and to put the context in terms of how I'm going to talk about. So I lived BR, or business rescue itself, when I was an employee and an executive at Edcon. So I've experienced business rescue in action.
And so secondly, I've experience of companies that are in dire state or distress, as they would put it, because those are the companies that I'm buying, targeting as a businessman and looking for opportunities. I bought one last year, a loss-making business. In 12 months, we turn around the business. It's profit-making. For me, that's where the opportunities are. So I like business rescue itself. And so my area of strength, it's on my management and expertise and experience, having run businesses and spent the bulk of my living years in corporate. And so here's very interesting statistic. I mean, I was sharing this with my colleagues just this afternoon as I was about to leave work. And they were startled, and I thought maybe it's something interesting to share. And because we moved from running a business that was loss-making to a profit-making business, and I was telling them that on an average, about 50% of the companies that exist in the country, they pretty much break even. You know, they break even. 50% of all the companies that we have in the country, they pretty much break even, and 25% make losses, huge losses, consistently making losses, and only 25% of companies are profitable. So the point I was making to them was that it's not an easy task to turn a loss-making business to be a profit-making business and sustain the profits of those businesses. And so that for me, it's a very critical background in terms of context around what I'm gonna be talking about, or as a prelude to my thoughts. And then so my strength, I think it's on turnaround. So maybe let me start by saying that, does business rescue work? Maybe that's a question that I need to ask based on the theme of our discussion. The answer is a resounding yes. So it makes sense that you need to do business rescue. And if we're successful in rescuing the businesses, the upside is huge. There are benefits in terms of new players participating, shareholders, and reorientating the structure and the direction of the company, and making sure that there's value that is unlocked, and securing or saving people's jobs. And it's good for economy, it's good for employees, it's good for everyone. So from that perspective, I think it's there. So I think it's important for me to declare this upfront, and so that because I'm just going to be critical of business rescue as well, because we need to have a balanced views around these things. That's what I learned a lot when I started being a scholar. So I'm struggling to finish my PhD. I should be writing my PhD rather than doing this, because it's easy to do things that you find comfortable and are fun to do, rather than trying to find a source and reading lots of concept and figuring a conceptual framework. So the strength, I think, my view, it's around, if you say that, okay, what can we do to make success? I think, Prof, when you gave us statistics in terms of the success of business rescue, and in fact, I think Workmen's has the best website, by the way, when it comes to these stories. I mean, it's Eric who sent out a newsletter around June last year that says that approximately 4,370 companies have entered business rescue, with 19% reaching a substantial implementation. So 19%, it's not a good percentage compared to in fact, compared in any respect. I mean, if for those of us who are parents, if any of your kids can come home with a 19% performance on anything, you'll be upset. So clearly, it's not succeeding, or the traction is not there. The outcomes are not visible there. So it's only, let's say, 20% if we're to be generous in terms of the progress around the success. So So therefore, there's a problem in our hands in terms of what really needs to be done. So for me, I think the big areas that needs to be focused on, it's on the issues around how do we turn around. So Eric in his towards the end of his comments and in passing, I wish you could have stayed with the issue longer. It's the critical roles of CROs that they need to play around this, and CROs are there to help shape the management plan and make sure that there's a clarity in terms of what the company must do to get out of the distress that they may find themselves in. And often these individuals are people who are outside of the entity, but highly experienced in terms of expertise dealing with the issues of that nature and turning around the businesses. I think for me, BRPs tend to get the limelight, which is fine, because ultimately they're the bosses who needs to make a call about what really needs to happen. But I think the successes and strength of it, somebody who's doing PhD on these things, maybe look at the role of chief restructuring officers or people with technical management skill sets to help in terms of the turnaround from a business rescue perspective. I think we might be getting some interesting information if one was to do that exercise. So based on that experience, I think what we need to do, and all I do is like, for example, let's take EdCon. I'm not going to talk about EdCon specifically because I don't want to leave that experience. It was not a great experience for me at a personal level, but business rescue was successful. I think Eric mentioned that Jet and Edgar's basically were saved and people's jobs were saved. And so therefore business rescue worked and it's a success. And SAA, it's a success, the fact that it can still fly. So I will finish off by the politics around at what cost and the dynamics that are unfolding within the landscape to get where we are. So back to what I think technical expertise, that's what people should be focusing on. And my role and participation is to make sure that I offer business rescue practitioners the technical expertise, given the experience that I had as a corporate executive and then now as a businessman, buying ailing businesses and turning them around in terms of getting the value. So one of the first things, the key three things that maybe four that you could do in terms of turnaround. One is to arrest the bleed. Most of the time we tap dance in terms of what makes businesses to lose money. So that's what people should go to make sure that they go and arrest the bleed. And then two, you need to cut the wastage. And so there are unproductive expenses that are out there and things that people could live without. So wastage needs to be done. And the third thing is it's sourcing cheaper. How best can we source cheaper? So and the fourth thing for me it's improving the top line. On sourcing, I will just pick one around sourcing cheaper. It's very interesting. This business I'm relating to that we basically bought last year as a loss-making and turnaround. The biggest chunk of impact that made sure that the business is profitable was what the business does. It does the hygiene equipment refurbishment, and then you look at where do you buy the material you need for you to be able to do the job. And the previous owner was just not paying attention in terms of where do they go to buy and try to figure out in terms of ways of buying cheaper. And so for example, where do you buy paint? Because for example, you use automotive paint, which is similar to the one that you find in the cars. And then so why do you go to a distributor in terms of going directly to buy from the manufacturer? And by doing that exercise, basically save the cost of paint by 50%. Because I mean, if a business buys, the business that I run, we spend about 50 liters, 50 liters a week basically to go through their business. So it costs a lot of money, and where do you buy other materials? So you need to go line by line to be able to do that. So I think that's around what would make a business rescue to be able to work. And then the big other ticket item for me is you need to have performance measurements. And I've learned this when I was in retail, that there are 3 key performance areas that you need to look at. So you need to look at operational performance, people's performance, and financial performance. So operations must make sense. It must be efficient. You must have a productivity. You must cut out the wastage and save time around it. And then so on people's side of things, you must make sure that you have skillful people that can execute and make sure that they can produce good quality work that is not going to have the redos. And then there's a quality of work that you by executing, and that did get right the first time. And the final one is a financial performance. And is what I've learned, at least from Messmart, was that of the 3 performance, you need to focus only on 2, operational and people's performance. Once you get operations right and people's technical skills right in terms of the ability to execute, then the financials will sort themselves out. It just makes sense, because if the business is efficient, it's effectively in terms of how it operates, and then we have people who are skillful in terms of how they execute, it does not make sense that that business will never have a good financial outcomes. So those are the key things that I thought I need to do in terms, for me, the success, just to summarize this point before I move to the next one, is that the success of a business rescue hinges largely on the technical skills that you would have within that are relevant to the business or the industry that you are trying to solve the problem. And so that's really what I really want to put it out there. So and so it doesn't matter whether the business rescue practitioner is a lawyer or a person with a finance background, but that person will need to have somebody with a solid operational experience to help in doing that. If you turn around or try to fix the problem of a retail-based or manufacturing-based a business in terms of rescue, you need to have people with a solid technical experience in that field that will help you to be able to achieve that. So that is very, very important as we conclude that part. So the other areas, I think there are maybe 2 areas that I want to touch on and move on. So the first one, it's on a reputational, what I would like to call it, a reputational risk in business rescue as an industry. So business rescue, in my view, and these are my personal views, I mean, there's just no point of stepping up into this discussion and have some bold claims and views in terms of what you're going to do, and rather than sticking to the next meeting, then this will be boring. So for me, I think BR imitates BEE, and you see some of them images and behavior that we have seen in Black economic empowerment. Any reasonable South African will tell you that the BEE as an act, as an instrument that needs to redress the imbalances of the past, is the best idea ever in terms of what needed to have happened from a paper and concept point of view. But it has been hijacked and corrupted by politicians. And then they are the biggest beneficiaries of it. They know half the things of the businesses they will be operating, and they will be signed to be partners to, and by not to blame other people who are politically networked. So companies themselves are the ones who are appointing these people to bring in or invite them as their business partners. So BR imitates BEE. So assets are sold for a song most of the time. we find that the businesses are there. Within a business, not everything would not be working. There will be elements of good parts of the businesses. And then, but there will not be a proper valuation around it. And then we find that businesses are sold next to nothing. And two, beneficiaries are largely, who buys these assets are largely associates or people with strong networks to those who will be making the decisions, or business rescue practitioners themselves sometimes. And thirdly, it benefits those with deep and big pockets. So if you don't have money or capital or strong balance sheet, chances are that you're not going to be able to afford to buy these sort of things. And this concept is similar to the concept of conglomerates in South Africa. In South Africa, so companies that ended up being large, it was a function of two things. It was largely driven by mining, which is the backbone of the economy of South Africa. So mining companies end up owning businesses in chemical space, businesses in steel. So they literally own the value chain. And you can say, okay, maybe it makes sense to own the value chain so that you don't have to spend money around other areas. But that's one part. And then what happened in South Africa when apartheid sanctions were starting to kick in, foreign companies needed to divest and leave South Africa. And who benefited from that exercise? It was the people with deep and big pockets. And that's why you would find Anglo-American owning AECI, it will own SABI, it will own Edgar's, it will own SAB, and everything like that. So that breeded the culture of conglomerates. And that through these BE schemes, similar things are happening today in South Africa. It's just that maybe we're not paying attention to, we're not aware of, it's not in the limelight, or no one talks about it. And then the fourth issue the fourth issue for me is exorbitant fees by practitioners. Some of the fees are just unreasonable. And then it's a point that I'll finish off with when we talk about the money. But the fifth thing for me is the unreasonable extensions to the deadlines in terms of making sure that you hold business practitioners responsible to make sure that they give us the business rescue plan within the stipulated time frame. And going back to Eric mentioned Tonga Tulet, I mean, there's been postponement after postponement after postponement. It's ridiculous. And then we have not only one business rescue practitioner, not only two, but we have three business rescue practitioners. I don't know, maybe it warrants or justifies that, but for me, it just doesn't make sense. And then you look at other experiences, I mean, there will be, according to the rules, and Eric will correct me here, that I think the maximum the business rescue practitioner can charge is something around 25,000 per week for a large corporate or a SOE. So it becomes less depending on the size of the entity, but it's the maximum that you'd get. But we have seen huge amounts of money, including EdCon, that business rescue practitioners were paid 45,000 a day. So, and then how do you now move from 25 to 45? And I think other companies are even more than that. And then extending the scope while you have been paid exorbitant fees, we can only know that it will never be in the best interest of that company itself. And so for me, that's really the big problems around the issues of the fees, and then how the fees are structured, and then the postponement of these things is like kicking the can so that the project can stay longer. Finally, I think on the issue of money, as I conclude this point, is that so SAA, in as much as it's back in the skies, we're happy to see it flying, but it has happened at a high cost. I mean, about at least 243 million from what we are told. I mean, it's a list of other people who got to benefit from 30,000, 25,000 each between the two business rescue practitioners to 40 odd something, 30 odd something to consult, audit firms, consulting firms, and legal firms. And then we'll have more than one, we'll have 3 of legal firms within one business rescue initiative, like SAA. But then maybe there'll be justification as to why we have this. And then we have these numbers with SAA because it's a public entity. In fact, it's a government entity. We demand to be having these numbers, which should be the case with the listed entities as well. But there's no visibility about the big numbers because of there's no obligation for the disclosure around these things. And some of my friends were business rescue practitioners, and then one of them, I think, when I was engaging him around what his thoughts are, as I was telling him I'm gonna share these controversial views, which I'm still sharing anyway. He didn't like it. He's saying that, you know what, if a doctor is a medical doctor is doing a good job and there's 1 or 2 bad apples within the practice or fraternity, we're not gonna brush them paint them rather with the same brush. And so that is that. I said, yeah, similarly, maybe it's the same thing as serving a prophet. There are false prophets out there. And then so not all pastors are bad, whereas there are bad pastors around that. So maybe it's important for me to say that not everyone is there. Other people are genuinely doing their good job. They don't see this as a money making scheme. Finally, for me, business rescue practitioners, in fact, they are no different from management and directors of the company. In fact, by law, the leadership of the executive and the board is suspended, and the business rescue practitioners are the ones who are assuming that responsibility. For me, assuming that responsibility, as you discharge your responsibility, you ought to be thoughtful in terms of the decisions that you are going to make from that perspective. For me, you are being entrusted with taking opportunity to resuscitate a person. By the way, a company is a person. And so I'm likening it to having to make decisions for your sibling who may be incapacitated and they cannot make decisions themselves. So if you have a responsibility to be making decisions on behalf of your sibling, you ought to make decisions in the best of their children, if they have children, best interest of their assets, if they have assets. So the decisions that you are making will be similar to the decisions that your sibling himself or herself would have made. They would have came to the same conclusion given the same set of information that was before them. I think business rescue practitioners need to start thinking along those lines, and that to understand that they carry a huge responsibility. I will pause there, and hopefully then in Q&A, there will be more excitement rather than me sharing my thoughts alone. I enjoy Q&As more than I enjoy just sharing my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mthunzi. That was really an in-depth explanation. We'll now move on to the interactive session. And since you're on screen, Mr. Mthunzi, we'd pose a question to you. One of the attendees, Mufaro, would like to know, what do you think are the best skill sets that a business rescue practitioner should maintain?
Yeah, it's a good question, but there's no right or wrong. I think any set of skills would work for me. The business rescue practitioner, if they have that industry experience, it would be a bonus, but they don't have to have that industry experience. But then they need to help surround themselves with people with the technical expertise that are relevant so that they could get to solutions quite quicker. Because some people's strength is actually it's leadership, it's on negotiations. but it may not be a technical skill, or they may be strong technically, but they are found wanting in other areas. It's difficult to find a well-rounded individual who will be good in all areas. It will be a fallacy to say that they should be good at everything specifically. There's no one size fits all.
Thank you for that. I think while you're on screen, Mvelo would like to know, what have you found to be a common reason for maybe businesses that are unable to succeed? And these would include what may be the internal factors and the external factors for failure.
So external factors are there, it's a reality, so we cannot run away from them. I mean, load shedding has a massive impact in terms of how people run businesses. Unrests are making big impact. So those things are very, very important. So we should not discount that. So it's a factor. But the biggest factor is internal, if you ask me. So most of the companies that end up going to business rescue, even liquidation, that step could have been avoided, because oftentimes there is a plan on the table. The people who are leading the business in form of management or executives, they have a solution to fix their own problems. You know what's the biggest problem? The biggest problem is that they don't have courage to execute on them. Because then the other decision that you need to take is to say, for us to bleed, we need to unbundle. By unbundling, we need to take some of the businesses and spin them off and then get money so that we could fund the other projects. But then you need to look at your colleagues that you've been knowing for years to say, your part of the business needs to go and we need to sell it. And we're going to use those funds to be able to protect the core or to execute on others. So we lack courage to be able to do that. So oftentimes business rescue practitioners, when they get into the company, there is a plan on the table that has been developed by management itself, but they didn't have courage to execute it.
Thank you for that. While we're speaking about financing and the issue of post-commencement finance, Yeshin would like to know, how do investors get sight of companies that are in distress in order for them to provide an investment facility?
So if it's in business rescue, it will be public knowledge, I guess. And so we all know and read about it. So I think he wants an industry trade or in a secret in terms of how I look at businesses that I'm interested to buy and they're in financial distress. You need to be friendly with banks. Remember, the banks would have been lending money to these entities. And these entities come to a point, at some point, they feel like, we're tired of giving you money. And so what are you going to do to be able to fix these things? And then we have other investment houses like PIC, IDC, for example. They will have a panel of people experts, and they have these people with technical expertise. They would send them to these investee companies to be able to help sort out the problems in terms of the turnaround. So long story short, find people who are lending or giving money to the entities in the form of the banks, or it could be shareholders, will have a great sight in terms of those companies if they are heading for a distress.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mtunzi.
Pleasure.
Dr. Levenstein, if we may pick your brain.
Sure.
Dr. Frank Matenda would like to know, what do you think are the current shortcomings in the current business rescue legislation in South Africa, given the contract in the economy and the increase in the number of companies filing for business rescue?
So I think it comes down to a large extent to the skill set of the business rescue practitioners. I really do believe that we need more people to become involved, more people to take up appointments for business rescue, get licensed, get involved in the restructuring and upskilling themselves, both from a financial and from an operational perspective. When you look at the statistics and you look at the number of companies that have come out of business rescue, a lot of those companies should have gone into liquidation from the very beginning. They shouldn't even have filed for business rescue. So the statistics don't necessarily tell the true story of successes, let's say, in the restructuring world. The other big issue is post-commencement finance, was touched on earlier. Now, any company that goes into business rescue has got to be able to continue to pay its overheads, continue to pay its costs, whether it's the business rescue practitioner, whether it's its suppliers. If it can't at least do that, then the company should go into liquidation. So post-commencement finance can either be provided by the company itself, or you go to your existing bankers, and most existing bankers are not that keen to lend more money to a company where they're already exposed. And potentially you can go to your shareholders to put in more money. For example, in Comair, the shareholders who bought into that company put in a substantial amount of post-commencement finance, but unfortunately through the pandemic, eventually they decided to walk away and not put in any more money. And I think the educational level of corporate South Africa is a critical aspect in respect of making it better. I think more education, more talking about how business rescue works, what the options are available to directors, not necessarily applying too late, but rather applying much earlier. And you can only do that when you're informed and understand about the option of business rescue and how it works. And we talk about a pre-assessment being done by a business rescue practitioner. No board of directors should place their companies into business rescue without first getting a full report from the prospective business rescue practitioner before they file a resolution for rescue, where the practitioner advises the board whether or not there in fact is a realistic prospect of the company being rescued. And if the practitioner can't say there is a realistic prospect, well then the board should consider liquidation. And I think once we get into that space, we'll see the statistics starting to talk more meaningfully to better outcomes and better percentages than what we've been quoted on tonight. So, you know, those are the shortcomings. I think that the banks and I think creditors have bought into the process. They understand it a lot better than 10 years ago, where we continued at, you know, the challenges of educating South Africans about business rescue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levenstein. Ayanda would like to know, does the CIPC actually effectively govern the business rescue process, inclusive of corporate governance, over the business rescue process and the business rescue practitioners?
It's a very good question, and let me explain it as follows. Firstly, CIPC, basically the Commission for Intellectual Property and Companies, has one role to play in relation to business rescue. They do push out statistics. That's the one thing that we have seen from time to time, not as often as we'd like, but we'd like to see more of that. And the other, of course, is providing licenses to business rescue practitioners. Now, anyone who wants to be licensed has to belong to one of the accredited organizations like the TMA, like SARIPA, the Law Society, SAICA, Cyber. You have to belong to one of those accredited organizations and be in good standing with that organization before you can apply for a license to be a business rescue practitioner. And CIPC are very adamant that that is the position. We would like to see, as practicing lawyers and stakeholders in the business rescue process, CIPC taking a more direct role in policing, let's say, errant business rescue practitioners that might not be operating where they should be. And the one thing that we are hoping for is that we just launched this year, SARIPA has just launched this year, in fact, last night, the business rescue course in conjunction with Insol International. And the more people that do these courses, and it's not the only course, there are others offered by UNISA and University of Johannesburg and others, the more education that we have by practitioners themselves and people involved in business rescue, the better I think the profession will become going forward. So I think CIPC have a role to play in that, and we're hoping that they will say, unless you do one of these courses, we are not going to license you as a practitioner. We're not there yet, but we're hoping to get there quite soon.
Thank you for that. Mbuyiseni would like to know, how would you deal with the negative effects or the negative publicity that's created with business rescue and companies going into business rescue with financial institutions being very averse to investing in them?
Okay, so it really is, and it comes back to the skill set of the practitioner. The practitioner is the mouthpiece of the company once it goes into business rescue, not the directors, not management. They are, to a large degree, not involved in the process of business rescue. Of course, they've got to be involved in respect to the operational side and assisting the practitioner who comes in fairly cold. But it's about communication, and that's the skill set of the practitioner. I always say communicate, and when you're in doubt, communicate some more. Because without your stakeholders knowing what's going on in the practice, or let's say in the actual turnaround of the business rescue, the administration of the business rescue, you're on a downward spiral. The more information you put out on the website, the more you engage with your committees, whether it's a creditors committee or an employee committee, the more the stakeholders come along in the process. If you keep people at bay and you don't keep your stakeholders close, that's when the business rescue practitioner is going to run into trouble. And we've seen in the big business rescues that practitioners, in fact, employ PR houses to come along and provide media support, articles in the newspaper, announcements in the newspaper, etc., etc. Go onto television, explain what's going on within the process, obviously, if it's a matter that's of substance. And I think that, you know, when people talk about a long time to get your money, as in the SAA example, there was a question put up on the screen, you know, is a receivership process? Yes, there's a long tail when it comes in certain instances to creditors getting their money, but at least it's not a liquidation. It's not a one-off, very small or negligible or even a zero dividend. At least creditors are getting something back. And the last point I want to make, Kajal, is that we need to talk about the success stories. And the PR aspect of it is critically important. If we talk about the negative outcomes of rescue and talk about statistics, we're not going to make any progress in South Africa in rescuing companies and saving companies, which was the objective of Chapter 6 from the outset.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levenstein. We are inundated with comments and questions, and this has really been a great platform for us to begin with. And we hope that your questions and comments can move forward in future webinars that we hold. And we hope to make this platform even more regular with future interactive sessions conclusively with the guest speakers inclusive. I think, Dr. Levenstein, one last question, which is almost a question that's quite similar across the board, is how can management and the shareholders or the stakeholders of the company balance the potential of the aim of the company being successful?
Look, it's a collaborative process. Remember that the management, or let's say the board, puts the practitioner in 80% of business rescues. Yes, you can go to court, put a company into business rescue, but in 80% of business rescues at least, it's the board that puts forward the business rescue practitioner. Now, there's an expectation, once the practitioner is appointed, to collaborate, to work together with management to rescue the company. Now, of course, in certain instances, management don't buy in, they don't cooperate, and there's a tension between the business rescue practitioner and the board, or let's say management, and that makes the practice for the business rescue practitioner extremely difficult and challenging. And I think, again, it comes back to the skill set of the practitioner. You've got to get your management and board literally on board in order to deliver a successful outcome in a business rescue. And again, if you push those people to the side and don't give them a voice, you're going to find it very, very difficult to implement a successful turnaround.
Thank you for that. I did say that was the last question, but it seems like we're being inundated with questions. Mbuyiseni, we would use you as our last attendee for a question. He would like to know, Dr. Levenstein, how would you determine the success? What is defined as the success saved from business rescue?
Is that for me or for Mr. Mtunzi?
Yes, you could probably give me your comments, and then we'll get Mr. Mtunzuni to provide his. Thank you.
Well, at least his view. As I said in my initial address, success means different things for different stakeholders. Of course, employees, if they keep their job and are not retrenched in a business rescue, that's a success for employees. creditors, if they get a better dividend than what they would have got in a liquidation, of course, anything better than, let's say, a very small dividend of 3 cents in the rand as opposed to a 30-cent payout, they'd be, I would think, more than happy. Suppliers who have a company that they continue to trade with, once the business rescue has been successful and the company is exited, of course, they'll be happy that the company has gone through a business rescue process and it's been successful, and they can continue to supply and provide goods and services to that company. Of course, shareholders in the main really are at the back end of the process. There's no real upside to them. Of course, if they buy back into the business, that might be a different scenario. And then, of course, for the business rescue practitioner, you are as good as your last job. If you've done a good job and you've exited from a process with a successful implementation of a business rescue plan, the likelihood of you getting appointed in the next matter is even higher. So I think success means different things to different people. I think for me, in 2023, I would like to see more operational turnarounds. In other words, a company going in, looking at the operations, maybe tweaking it in a particular way, maybe getting your balance sheet better leveraged, maybe tweaking your management, looking at whether the board is in fact competent, and then exiting from rescue and allowing that company to continue to trade on a solvent basis without any sale to a third party. I think if we can see more of those, for me, as someone involved in business rescue, I would be a very happy attorney.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mtunzi, would you like to add anything to that question?
No, I'm not adding to the question. I think it's a tough question, but he answered very well. Eric, I'm not going to go in there. So, but there are, maybe there's one big question that somebody's asking around CROs. And so the chief restructuring or officer so can be somebody who will help to execute on the business turnaround, and they can come up with the different sets of skills depending on the nature of the problem. And so, but they are very critical in my view. And these people, I think they can get into the businesses. They can go through supporting the business rescue practitioners, but the BRP will be the one basically appointing or making a call on those people. But if they were to participate the stage before business rescue kicks in, while the business is still in distress, there are two ways of doing it. So banks are lending a lot of money. So banks would normally worry if they don't see a turnaround happening and or knowing that the business could be heading for a disaster. So they would tend to have these individuals, but they can recommend them to the executive or management of the company to incorporate these people or work with them even in a consulting capacity. And then so then the investors or shareholders such as any investor or the lenders like your IDC, they normally have a panel, and then people that sit on the panel can be deployed at any given time to their respective companies where they have invested. So they have a more direct influence in terms of getting people to go in there with expertise to help turn around the financial fortunes of those entities. Yeah, that's all I wanted to clarify on that because somebody online asked that question.
Thank you, Mr. Mtunzi. Thank you so much, all attendees, for your interactive session. We've now come to the closure of the webinar, and I call upon Professor Rajendra Rajaram to give us some closing remarks and the vote of thanks.
Respected guests, program director, and our special invitees, Dr. Levenstein and Mr. Mtunzi. It's really wonderful to hear you this afternoon speak about business rescue, and especially the potential that it has for turning around the economy of our country. When we first came up with the idea of a business rescue unit, when our dean, Professor Mabutu Sibanda, first mooted the idea of a business rescue unit, we recognized that from the university, we wanted to play a role in the economy. We wanted to play a role in society. I think we've heard about the detrimental impact that the premature closing of a business has, not only in terms of losses of jobs, but that negative and that adverse impact that it has on our society. So we wanted to play a role together with businesses, academics, bankers, and other researchers, business rescue practitioners, so that we could have a part in contributing to a better society, a stronger business environment. Today is almost a start of that journey, because we're going to have many more of this of symposiums and sessions like this. So in order to get something for this to be possible, many different role players came together, and we're really glad at the enthusiasm that everyone has actually displayed. There's many that we want to thank for making this possible, but especially yourself, Dr. Levenstein, for your rich contribution and insights, and Mr. Mtunzi as well. It's really good to hear that, well, firstly, it's concerning to hear that there are so few companies that are profitable, but then at the same time, you gave us the solution, Mr. Mtunzi, where you spoke so well of business rescue, and it's good to know that there seems to be this positive vibe around business rescue as a way to actually solve that problem. It was really heartening, Dr. Levenstein, to hear what you said about the US courts and the faith that they have in our Chapter 6 legislation. I think that it bodes a long way, not just for profitability of our businesses, but for assurance of the business, but for global and international investors coming in as well. So we really want to say thank you very much for these insights that you have provided. And then to our business rescue members, to our Dean, Professor Mabutu Sibanda, for leading this process, our Program Director, Ms. Gumede, and Kajal Ramnanun as well, for the really wonderful and insightful, dignified and diplomatic way in which you've handled the session this afternoon. We also want to thank the various guests and other business rescue members who have been involved in this process, like Dr. Yalezo. And then finally, also to thank our university's PR division, and especially Ms. Hazel Langa, for the exceptional amount of energy that you've put into this. So, as I've mentioned, that our business rescue unit is moving forward. We want to be involved in this discussion, and we want to make a contribution towards a more vibrant economy and to a better democracy as well. And what you've seen this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, is very much of a starter. You know, whenever you go to a restaurant and you have a starter, you never should be satisfied with the starter, because the starter should lead you to the main course. And that main course is going to be all the future work that's going to be coming, and our future involvement from our business rescue unit. For example, we're having a very big international conference on business rescue and business regeneration at the Ilangeni. It's an international conference with international guests from the 22nd to the 24th. And there's lots of research that we are undertaking, short courses, so that ultimately all of this can make a contribution, as I said, to a better economy and a much healthier democracy. And that's a role that we want to play as the business rescue unit from UKZN. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, once again for making this a success. Take care, everything of the best, and hopefully we'll see you in a few days' time on the 22nd to the 24th at our Business Rescue Conference. Okay, take care and all the best.